On Christmas morning, I opened a gift from my wife's family. It was my missing wristwatch from last year, the only thing left of my father. I thought I lost it. Her sister laughed and said, "Oh, I forgot I took that." When I confronted her, my Mill said, "Don't start drama over a watch." That night, I quietly packed a bag. The next day, my wife woke me up screaming, "What did you say to her?" You know that feeling when you're sitting in someone else's living room, wearing matching pajamas that make you look like a reject from a Christmas catalog, and you're wondering how the hell your life became a Hallmark movie written by Satan himself? Yeah, that was me on Christmas morning at my wife Clara's parents' house, surrounded by enough fake cheer to power Times Square for a week. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of this dog and pony show, and I was still playing my role like some kind of masochistic method actor. The whole family had this routine down to a science. We'd all stumble downstairs in our coordinated sleepwear. This year's theme was Winter Wonderland, which apparently meant we all looked like we'd been attacked by a bedazzling gun. Line up for photos that would make Norman Rockwell roll over in his grave and pretend like we actually gave a damn about each other for the next 8 hours. Clara's mom, Sylvia, was already in full hostess mode, flitting around the kitchen like a caffeinated hummingbird in a velour tracksuit. She had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes. You know, that special brand of suburban mom fakeness that could cut glass. "Oh, honey," she'd coo at me while simultaneously looking right through me like I was a particularly disappointing piece of furniture. "You look so handsome in those pajamas." Translation: You look ridiculous, but I'm legally obligated to be nice to you because you're technically family. Then there was Harper, Clara's sister, who had turned passive-aggressive commentary into an art form. She was already holding court in the living room, regaling everyone with stories about her latest boyfriend, some finance bro named Chad or Brad or whatever generic white boy name was trending that month. Harper had this talent for making every conversation about herself while simultaneously finding ways to take little digs at everyone else. It was honestly impressive in a deeply twisted way. "Oh my God, remember last Christmas when you tried to help with the turkey and almost burned down Mom's kitchen?" she'd say with that tinkling laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "You're so much better at other things." What other things, you ask? Hell if I know, because Harper never actually specified what I was supposedly good at. Maybe she meant breathing. Maybe that was my one marketable skill in the Harper Reynolds extended universe. But this year felt different. There was this tension in the air, thick as Sylvia's famous eggnog and twice as nauseating. Maybe it was because I'd finally started noticing how nobody in this family actually listened to each other. They just waited for their turn to talk. Maybe it was because I'd realized that 5 years of holidays had blurred together into one endless loop of forced merriment and emotional constipation. Or maybe it was because I'd started questioning why I kept showing up to these gatherings feeling like I needed a shower afterward. The morning kicked off with breakfast, which was always this elaborate production that somehow managed to stress everyone out while they pretended to be having fun. I'd volunteered to make pancakes. Not because I'm some kind of culinary genius, but because it gave me something to do with my hands while I tried to ignore the low-level anxiety that had been gnawing at my gut since we'd pulled into the driveway the night before. I was at the stove, flipping pancakes and trying to tune out Harper's running commentary about how her new apartment was so much more sophisticated than our place, when she decided to grace me with her attention. "Oh, cute shirt," she said, eyeing the flannel Clara had bought me for the occasion. The way she said cute made it sound like she was talking about a particularly pathetic puppy. "Very lumberjack chic. Are we going camping after breakfast?" I forced a smile and kept flipping pancakes, because what was the alternative? Tell my sister-in-law that her personality was about as appealing as a root canal? Start a fight on Christmas morning over a shirt? Clara would never forgive me, and honestly, I was already walking on eggshells in this family without adding "couldn't take a joke" to my list of alleged character flaws. When I finally plated the pancakes, golden brown and fluffy as hell, "Thank you very much." Harper took a bite and made this face like she was being forced to eat cardboard. These are edible," she announced to the table. "A little heavy, though. I usually make mine with almond flour and egg whites. Much lighter. Edible." 5 years of marriage, and my sister-in-law's best compliment for my cooking was edible. I sat down at the table, cutting into my apparently offensive pancakes, and tried to remind myself that this was just Harper being Harper. She probably didn't mean anything by it. She was just one of those people who couldn't help but turn every conversation into a subtle competition. But Sylvia's reaction, or lack thereof, was what really got under my skin. She just kept eating, nodding along like Harper's commentary was perfectly normal family banter. "No, Harper, that's rude. No, the pancakes are delicious. Thank you for cooking." Just silence and that fake smile, like she was watching a mildly entertaining TV show instead of sitting at a table where her daughter was casually shitting on her son-in-law. Clara, meanwhile, was doing that thing she always did when Harper started her routine, staring intently at her phone like she'd suddenly received the most fascinating text message in human history. It was her standard conflict avoidance strategy, perfected over 32 years of living with Harper's particular brand of emotional terrorism. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that I'd learned to associate with family gatherings. That feeling of being an outsider looking in, of being tolerated rather than welcomed, of constantly having to prove that I deserved to be at this table. And the worst part was that I'd been feeling it for so long, I'd started to think it was normal. Like maybe this was just how families worked, and I was the problem for expecting anything different. The morning stretched ahead of us like a marathon of manufactured joy, complete with gift-opening ceremonies and more photo ops than a celebrity wedding. I could already see it all playing out. The carefully orchestrated chaos, the obligatory, candid moments that would end up on social media, the exhausting performance of being grateful and happy and perfectly content with my place in this bizarre family ecosystem. But something felt different this year. Maybe it was the way Harper's comments seemed sharper, more deliberate. Maybe it was how Sylvia's indifference felt more pronounced. Or maybe it was just that I was finally getting tired of pretending that any of this was okay. Either way, I had this growing sense that something was about to shift, like the calm before a storm that nobody else could see coming. If I'd known that a tiny wrapped box was about to blow up my entire world, I probably would have faked food poisoning and locked myself in the bathroom for the rest of the morning. But there I was, sitting cross-legged on Sylvia's pristine carpet like some kind of overgrown kid at summer camp, watching Clara's family execute their gift-giving ritual with military precision. The whole production was choreographed better than a Broadway show. Sylvia played director, orchestrating who opened what when, making sure every moment was properly documented for posterity. Wait, let me get the camera ready," she'd screech every 30 seconds, like we were filming a documentary about the world's most boring Christmas morning instead of just trying to get through another family gathering without anyone having a nervous breakdown. Clara was in her element during these moments, playing the role of dutiful daughter with Oscar-worthy commitment. She'd gotten her mom some overpriced candle that probably cost more than my car payment, and Sylvia was carrying on like Clara had just handed her the crown jewels. "Oh, honey, this is perfect. How did you know I was running low on my favorite scent?" "Because you literally sent her a link to it 3 weeks ago, Sylvia, but sure, let's pretend this was some kind of psychic gift-giving miracle." Harper, meanwhile, was working the room like a seasoned politician, distributing presents with this smug little smile that suggested she'd either cured cancer or figured out how to turn water into wine. She'd gotten Clara some ridiculously expensive skincare set that probably cost more than I made in a week, which prompted a whole conversation about Harper's amazing skin secrets and how she'd discovered this incredible Korean beauty routine. When it came time for my turn to receive the annual Harper special, because God forbid anyone in this family just skip the gift exchange and admit we all barely tolerate each other, she handed me a small box with this theatrical flourish that would have made Shakespeare weep. "This one's really special," she said, and I swear to God, there was something in her voice that should have been a red flag. Like when a car salesman tells you he's got the perfect deal just for you. I figured it was going to be another one of her classic passive-aggressive gifts. Maybe a self-help book about communication and marriage, or a gift card to some store I'd never shop at with a note about expanding my horizons. Harper had a real talent for giving presents that were technically thoughtful, but somehow made you feel like garbage for receiving them. It was honestly impressive how she'd turned gift-giving into a form of psychological warfare. The box was small, wrapped in that expensive paper that costs more per square foot than some people's rent, with a bow that looked like it had been tied by elves with OCD. For a second, I actually felt bad about my usual cynicism. Maybe Harper had finally decided to play nice. Maybe this was her attempt at a genuine gesture, and I was just being a paranoid asshole. I should have trusted my gut. I peeled off the wrapping paper with everyone watching, feeling like a lab rat in some twisted psychology experiment. Clara was leaning forward with this expectant smile, like she was in on some joke I hadn't heard yet. Sylvia had her phone out, ready to capture my reaction for whatever social media platform middle-aged suburban moms use to document their family's fake happiness. The box itself was one of those fancy jewelry boxes you get from department stores, the kind with velvet lining that makes everything look more expensive than it actually is. I popped it open, expecting cufflinks or maybe a tie clip, something safe and boring and appropriately generic for the brother-in-law you're legally obligated to acknowledge twice a year. Instead, my entire world just stopped. Sitting there in that little velvet nest was my wristwatch. Not a watch that looked like mine. Not a similar model. My actual, specific, irreplaceable wristwatch that I'd been mourning for an entire goddamn year. It was a 1970s Omega that had belonged to my dad, nothing fancy or expensive by today's standards, but it was the only thing I had left of him after he died when I was 23. The watch had this distinctive scratch on the crystal from where he'd knocked it against a door frame, and a tiny dent in the case that he'd gotten from dropping it while working on his car. It wasn't worth much to anyone else, but to me, it was priceless. I'd torn apart our apartment looking for it last Christmas. I'd retraced my steps for weeks, checked every pocket, every drawer, every possible place it could have fallen. I called hotels we'd stayed at, restaurants we'd eaten at, even posted on lost and found Facebook groups like some kind of desperate lunatic. Clara had helped me look, or at least she pretended to help, while making sympathetic noises about how these things just happen sometimes. And now here it was, sitting in a gift box from Harper like it was some kind of thoughtful present instead of grand theft. My hand started shaking as I lifted it out of the box. It was definitely mine. Same scratch, same dent, same worn leather strap that I'd been meaning to replace for years, but never got around to because it still smelled faintly like my dad's cologne. "Oh my God," Harper said, and her voice had this sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. "I totally forgot I borrowed that for Jennifer's wedding last year. I kept meaning to give it back, but you know how crazy things have been." She giggled, actually giggled, like misplacing someone's most precious possession for 12 months was just a silly little oopsie. Borrowed. That's what she called it. Like I'd handed it to her with a smile and a sure, take your time bringing it back. Like I hadn't spent an entire year thinking I'd lost the last tangible connection to my father. "You borrowed it." The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, and I could hear this dangerous edge in my own voice that probably should have been a warning to everyone in the room. Harper's smile faltered for just a second, like she'd finally picked up on the fact that I wasn't exactly thrilled with her little revelation. "Well, yeah, I needed a nice watch for the wedding photos, and you weren't using it that day anyway. I was going to ask, but you guys had already left for your trip." Ask. She was going to ask. After the fact. After she'd already taken it. "So you stole it," I said, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. The giggle that came out of Harper's mouth was like nails on a chalkboard. "Stole? God, you're so dramatic. It's not like I pawned it or anything. I just forgot I had it. Family borrows things from each other all the time." I looked around the room, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge how completely insane this whole situation was. Clara was staring at her hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Sylvia was suddenly very interested in cleaning up wrapping paper, moving around the room with the focused intensity of someone trying really hard to pretend nothing was happening. "Don't start drama over a watch," Sylvia finally said, not even looking up from her aggressive trash collection. "It's Christmas morning, for crying out loud." Drama. Wanting my stolen property back was drama. Expecting an apology for a year of grief was drama. Being upset that my sister-in-law had casually helped herself to my most precious possession and then acted like I should be grateful she'd finally decided to return it was drama. I sat there holding my father's watch, feeling like I was living in some kind of alternate reality where theft was just a quirky family tradition and I was the asshole for not being cool with it. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable for everyone, which apparently was my fault too, because I was the one making things weird by having feelings about the whole situation. That moment, sitting in that perfect living room, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family, holding the watch I'd grieved for like it was a dead relative. That's when everything clicked into place. All the little comments, all the dismissive attitudes, all the times I'd felt like I was going crazy for thinking something was off. This wasn't just Harper being thoughtless. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was exactly who these people were, and exactly how much I mattered to them. You know that moment when you realize your entire life has been built on a foundation of bullshit, and the only reasonable response is to pack your stuff and get the hell out of Dodge? Yeah, that was me at 2 a.m. in a Holiday Inn Express, folding my clothes with the kind of methodical precision usually reserved for bomb disposal experts. The hotel room was one of those generic boxes that could have been anywhere in America. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige furniture that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd given up on life. The air conditioning unit under the window was making this rhythmic clicking sound that should have been annoying, but honestly, it was the most honest thing I'd heard all day. At least the AC wasn't pretending to be something it wasn't. I'd driven here in complete silence after the watch incident, with Clara sitting in the passenger seat radiating this wounded energy like I was the one who'd done something wrong. She tried to start conversations a few times. You know Harper didn't mean anything by it. And maybe we should talk about this when we're both calmer. But I just couldn't. What was there to say? That I was upset my wife's family had stolen from me, and then acted like I was being unreasonable for having feelings about it? The whole drive back to the hotel, I kept thinking about that moment when Sylvia told me not to start drama. Like wanting my father's watch back was some kind of character flaw. Like being hurt by theft was a personality disorder. The more I replayed it in my head, the angrier I got, until I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Now I was alone in this sad little room, packing my life into a suitcase like I was fleeing a crime scene. Which, in a way, I guess I was. The crime of letting myself believe I actually belonged in that family. The crime of thinking that after 5 years of marriage, I'd earned something more than tolerance disguised as acceptance. I started with the easy stuff: socks, underwear, the boring essentials that don't require any emotional energy to deal with. There's something weirdly therapeutic about folding socks when your world is falling apart. Each pair rolled up into a neat little bundle, everything in its place, everything under control. If only the rest of life worked that way. My hands were surprisingly steady as I worked my way through the pile of clothes. No shaking, no tears, just this cold, methodical calm that felt like I was watching someone else pack. Maybe this was what shock felt like. Or maybe this was what clarity looked like after years of gaslighting yourself into thinking dysfunction was normal. The watch was sitting on the nightstand next to the lamp, ticking away like nothing had happened. I'd put it there when we got back to the room, and now I couldn't stop looking at it. Such a small thing to blow up a marriage over, right? That's probably what Clara was thinking. That's definitely what her family was thinking. Poor sensitive guy, can't handle a little misunderstanding about a watch. But it wasn't about the watch, was it? It was about the year I'd spent thinking I was losing my mind. It was about Clara helping me look for something her sister had stolen. It was about the casual cruelty of that giggle when Harper acted like grand theft was just a silly mistake. It was about sitting in that living room and realizing that to these people, I wasn't a person with feelings. I was just an inconvenience they had to manage. I picked up the watch and held it in my palm, feeling the weight of it. 40-something grams of metal and leather that somehow contained my entire relationship with my father. He'd worn this thing every day for 20 years, through construction jobs and family dinners and Saturday morning cartoons with me on his lap. After he died, wearing it made me feel like he was still with me somehow. Losing it had felt like losing him all over again. And Harper had just taken it, like it was a costume jewelry she could borrow for a photo op. The worst part wasn't even the theft. It was how little it meant to her. How she'd forgotten she even had it. My most precious possession was so forgettable to her that it had spent a year sitting in some drawer while I grieved for it. I slipped the watch into my pocket and kept packing. Jeans, shirts, that stupid flannel Harper had mocked. Everything felt different now, like I was looking at the belongings of a stranger. This was the wardrobe of a man who'd been playing a role for 5 years, trying to be the son-in-law they wanted instead of the person he actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Where did you go? Can we please talk about this?" I stared at the message for a long time before turning the phone face down on the bed. What was there to talk about? How she'd watched me tear apart our apartment looking for the watch and never said a word. How she'd sat there in silence while her family treated me like garbage. How after 5 years of marriage, she still chose them over me every single time. The truth was, Clara probably didn't even realize what she'd done. In her mind, she was just keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, trying to make everyone happy. That's what she'd been trained to do her whole life. Smooth things over, minimize problems, pretend dysfunction was just quirky family dynamics. She probably thought she was being loyal to everyone by staying neutral. But neutrality in the face of theft isn't neutrality, it's complicity. Silence in the face of cruelty isn't peacekeeping, it's enabling. And I was done being the acceptable casualty of their family's twisted version of harmony. I pulled out a piece of hotel stationery, the kind with the cheesy logo that makes you feel like you're writing a ransom note, and started writing. Clara, I can't do this anymore. It's not about the watch. It's about what the watch represents. It's about a year of letting me think I was crazy. It's about your family treating me like I don't matter, and you letting them. I need some time to figure out what comes next. Don't try to find me tonight. Short and to the point. No accusations, no ultimatums, just the truth. I folded the note and left it on her pillow, next to the matching pajamas she'd probably never wear again. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, then stopped and came back for one more thing, my phone charger. If you're going to disappear into the night, you might as well do it with a fully charged phone. Some revolutions require proper planning. The lobby was empty except for a night clerk who looked like he'd seen enough middle-aged men checking out at 2 a.m. to know better than to ask questions. I booked another room at a different hotel across town, paid in cash, and drove through the empty streets feeling like I was escaping from prison. The new hotel was just as generic as the first one, but somehow it felt different. It felt like possibility, like the first night of the rest of my life, even if I had no idea what that life was going to look like. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the watch tick in the darkness, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Nothing ruins a good night's sleep quite like your wife pounding on your hotel door at 6 a.m. like she's the goddamn police serving a warrant. I'd finally managed to drift off around 4, my mind quiet for the first time in months, when the sound of fists hammering on door 237 jolted me back to the beautiful reality that my life had officially gone to hell. I stumbled to the door in my boxers and yesterday's t-shirt, squinting through the peephole like I was checking for snipers. There was Clara, and she looked like she'd been hit by a truck driven by her own emotions. Hair everywhere, eyes red and puffy, wearing the same clothes from yesterday like she'd never made it to bed. For a split second, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. What did you say to Harper? That was her opening line. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry about what happened. Not even, can we talk about this like adults? Nope. Straight to defending her precious sister like I was some kind of villain who'd attacked an innocent victim. I opened the door just wide enough to lean against the frame, mostly because I wasn't about to let her storm into my sanctuary and turn it into another battlefield. Good morning to you too, Clara. Nice to see you're concerned about my well-being. Don't be sarcastic with me right now, she snapped, pushing past me into the room anyway, because apparently respecting boundaries was just another one of those optional life skills nobody in her family had mastered. Harper is devastated. She's been crying all night because of what you said to her. Devastated. Harper was devastated. The woman who'd stolen my most precious possession and then laughed about it was now the victim in this little drama. I closed the door and turned to face my wife, who was pacing around the room like a caged tiger, her whole body vibrating with righteous indignation on behalf of her kleptomaniac sister. What exactly did I say to her, Clara? Because I'm pretty sure all I did was ask if she'd stolen my watch. I kept my voice level, which seemed to piss her off even more. Nothing drives people crazier than calm rationality when they're trying to start a fight. You humiliated her in front of everyone. You accused her of being a thief. She said you were yelling and making her feel like a criminal. Clara's voice was getting higher with each word, that particular pitch that meant she was about to hit full hysteria mode. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile this version of events with what had actually happened. I never raised my voice. I asked 2 questions, if she'd borrowed it and if she'd stolen it. That's it. And she did steal it, by the way, in case you missed that part. She forgot she had it. People forget things. It's not like she sold it or something. And there it was, the defense I'd been expecting. It wasn't theft if you forgot you'd taken something. It wasn't wrong if you didn't mean it maliciously. It wasn't a big deal because Harper's feelings were more important than mine. The logic of enablers everywhere. Minimize the crime, maximize the victim's discomfort at being called out. She forgot she had my father's watch for an entire year, Clara. An entire year. Do you understand what that means? I thought it was gone forever. I grieved for it. And you helped me look for it. I was still keeping my voice calm, but I could feel this cold anger building in my chest like ice crystals forming in my lungs. Clara's face did this weird thing where she looked almost guilty for about half a second before the defensive walls slammed back up. I didn't know she had it. How was I supposed to know? But you knew eventually, didn't you? The question came out before I'd even fully formed the thought, but the moment I said it, I knew it was true. Maybe not at first, but at some point, you found out. And you said nothing. The way she looked away told me everything I needed to know. Bingo. My loving wife had known her sister was a thief and had chosen to protect Harper instead of telling me the truth. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath for a moment. It's not that simple, she said quietly, which was Clara speak for. Yes, I knew, but I'm going to make this somehow your fault anyway. Actually, it is that simple. You knew Harper had stolen my watch, and you said nothing. You let me think I was crazy. You let me beat myself up for losing the only thing I had left of my father. You watched me tear apart our apartment looking for it, and you said nothing. I was trying to keep the peace. Harper's been struggling with. Oh, for fuck's sake, Clara. Harper's been struggling with what? The burden of being a grown woman who steals things? The terrible hardship of facing consequences for her actions. My calm was finally cracking, and honestly, it felt good to let some of this rage out instead of swallowing it like I'd been doing for years. She has issues with boundaries, okay? She's always been like this. Mom says it's because. I don't give a shit what Mommy says about Harper's boundary issues. She stole from me, and you covered for her. I was pacing now too, the small hotel room feeling like a cage. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Knowing that my own wife values her sister's comfort more than my sanity. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, and for a moment, she looked small and defeated. She called me at midnight, sobbing. She said you'd made her feel like a monster in front of the whole family. She said you'd embarrassed her in front of the kids. The kids. Of course, Harper had played the think of the children card. Never mind that the kids had been in the other room when the whole thing went down. Never mind that maybe seeing an adult face consequences for stealing would have been a valuable lesson. Harper's feelings were what mattered here. Did you ever think about calling me to see how I was feeling? Did you ever think about apologizing for the fact that your family stole from me and then acted like I was the problem? I was standing over her now, and she was looking up at me with these big wounded eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. You left. You just disappeared in the middle of the night like some kind of drama queen. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to think, wow, maybe my husband is upset because my sister stole his most precious possession and my family treated him like garbage when he dared to have feelings about it. I could hear my voice getting louder, but I didn't care anymore. You were supposed to think, maybe I should apologize instead of demanding that he apologize to his thief. Clara stood up, crossing her arms over her chest in that defensive posture that meant the conversation was about to get even more ridiculous. Harper is not a thief. She made a mistake. And now she's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown and screamed at her like a crazy person. And there it was, the real reason for this little 6 a.m. visit. Harper was already working damage control, spinning the story to make herself the victim and me the villain. I was willing to bet money that by noon, half the family would believe I'd had some kind of psychotic break over a borrowed watch. Let me guess, I said, sitting down in the room's single chair and looking at my wife like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. Harper's version has me as the unstable husband who can't handle family dynamics. Harper's version has me yelling and making threats. Harper's version conveniently leaves out the part where she committed theft. Clara's silence was confirmation enough. The narrative was already being written, and I was the villain in this particular family drama. My reputation was being demolished in real time by a woman who couldn't even admit she'd done anything wrong. I need you to come back and apologize to Harper, Clara said finally, like she was asking me to pick up milk from the store instead of asking me to grovel to my own thief. If you just explain that you overreacted. No, The word came out flat and final. I'm not apologizing to Harper. I'm not apologizing to your mother. I'm not apologizing to anyone for being upset that your sister stole from me. Then what are you saying? That you're just going to stay here and sulk until I agree that my entire family is evil? I looked at her sitting there on the bed, defensive and hurt, and completely missing the point, and I realized that this wasn't going to get better. This wasn't a misunderstanding we could work through. This was exactly who she was, and exactly who her family was, and I'd been an idiot to think 5 years of marriage would change any of it. I'm saying that I'm done being the family scapegoat, I said quietly. I'm done pretending that theft is forgetfulness and cruelty is just quirky family dynamics. And I'm done with a wife who thinks I should apologize for being stolen from. The look on her face told me she finally understood that this wasn't just about a watch anymore. 3 days after the hotel room showdown with Clara, I was sitting in a Starbucks trying to pretend my life wasn't imploding when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Elise's name, Clara's cousin, the one family member who'd never made me feel like I needed to apologize for existing. For a split second, I thought maybe someone in that family had come to their senses and was calling to check on me. I should have known better. Hey, Elise, I answered, stirring my coffee like it held the secrets to happiness. What's up? There was this pause, the kind that tells you someone's about to deliver news that's going to ruin your day. Listen, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know what people are saying. My stomach dropped like I'd just gotten on the wrong elevator. What people? Saying about what? About Christmas morning. About what happened with Harper. Elise's voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to tell you your house is on fire, but they don't want to be the one to break the news. I set down my coffee and leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, watching some college kid struggle with the espresso machine behind the counter. Let me guess. I'm the crazy one, right? She's been telling everyone that you had some kind of breakdown, that you started screaming at her in front of the kids, calling her names, accusing her of being a criminal. Elise paused, and I could hear her taking a breath like she was gearing up for the really bad part. She's saying you were unstable, that Clara was scared of you. Scared of me. That was rich. Clara, who'd pounded on my door at 6 a.m. demanding I apologize to her thief of a sister, was apparently now playing the role of terrified wife. I had to give Harper credit. She was working this narrative like a professional spin doctor. And let me guess, I said, watching a businessman in an expensive suit yell at someone on his phone about quarterly projections. Harper's version leaves out the part where she stole my watch and then laughed about it. What watch? Elise asked, and her genuine confusion told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Harper had edited the story. So I told her the whole thing. How Harper had gifted me my own stolen property, how she'd giggled about borrowing it for a year, how Sylvia had told me not to start drama over wanting my father's watch back, how Clara had sat there in silence while her family treated me like I was the problem. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Jesus Christ, Elise finally whispered. She actually stole your dad's watch. For a whole year. And then acted like I should be grateful she finally decided to give it back. I was trying to keep my voice level, but even talking about it made my blood pressure spike. But according to the family grapevine, I'm the unstable one who can't handle a simple misunderstanding. Oh my God, that's not what anyone's been told. Harper said you just exploded out of nowhere, that you accused her of theft over some miscommunication about a watch she'd borrowed with permission. Elise sounded genuinely horrified, which was honestly the first normal reaction I'd gotten from anyone in Clara's family. With permission. Right. Because I'm known for lending out my most precious possessions to people who treat me like garbage. I laughed, but it came out bitter and sharp. What else is she saying? That you've been having problems for a while. That Clara's been worried about your mental health. That this was just the final straw. Elise's voice was getting quieter, like she was afraid someone might overhear her telling me the truth. Sylvia's been telling people that you're too sensitive for family life, and that Clara deserves better. Too sensitive for family life. Translation: too willing to call out their bullshit. Too likely to expect basic human decency. Too prone to having feelings when people steal from me and then mock me for being upset about it. And Clara's going along with this? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Of course she was. Clara had never met a family narrative she wouldn't support, no matter how far from reality it wandered. She's not exactly contradicting it. She's been telling people that you stormed out over a misunderstanding, that you wouldn't listen to reason, that you've been under a lot of stress lately. Elise paused again. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear. Actually, it was exactly what I needed to hear. Because now I knew what I was dealing with. This wasn't just Harper being defensive about getting caught stealing. This was a coordinated character assassination designed to make me the villain in a story where I'd been robbed and then gaslit about it. Has anyone asked for my side of the story? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not really. I mean, a few people have asked where you are, but mostly everyone's just accepting Harper's version. The disappointment in Elise's voice was almost as depressing as the actual news. I think they want to believe it's just a misunderstanding, you know? It's easier than dealing with the idea that Harper might actually be a thief. I finished for her. It's easier than admitting that their precious Harper is a thief who's been stealing from family members and getting away with it because everyone's too chicken shit to call her out. Wait, family members? Plural. And that's when it hit me. If Harper had been comfortable enough to steal my watch and then forget about it for a year, this probably wasn't her first rodeo. People don't usually start their criminal careers with grand theft sentimental value. They work up to it. Elise, has Harper ever borrowed anything from you? Or from other family members? Jewelry, clothes, anything that maybe never made it back? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Elise finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Oh shit, my grandmother's ring. She borrowed it for a date last spring and said she'd return it the next week. When I asked about it, she said she couldn't find it, that maybe she'd lost it somewhere. But you never really believed that, did you? I know. I didn't. But I figured, you know, family. Maybe she really had lost it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Elise's voice was getting stronger, like she was putting pieces together in real time. But now that you mention it, my mom said something a few months ago about how Harper had borrowed some earrings and never brought them back. So there it was. Harper wasn't just a one-time opportunist who'd made a mistake with my watch. She was a serial thief who'd been working her way through the family's valuables like she was running her own personal pawn shop. And everyone had been making excuses for her because confronting the truth was more uncomfortable than pretending it wasn't happening. How many people has she called? I asked, already dreading the answer. Pretty much everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins. She's been working the phones like she's running for office. Elise sighed. She called me yesterday crying about how you traumatized her, how she was afraid to be around you now. Really laying it on thick. Afraid to be around me. The woman who'd stolen from me was now afraid of me. The victim had become the perpetrator in this twisted little soap opera, and I was somehow the dangerous one for having the audacity to call theft what it was. And nobody thought to call me. Nobody wanted to hear what actually happened. I don't think most people have your number. And Claire has been saying you need space, that you're not ready to talk to family yet. Elise's voice had this careful quality again, like she was walking through a minefield. I think she's been intercepting people who might want to reach out. Of course she had. Can't have family members getting my side of the story when there's a perfectly good narrative already in place. Can't risk someone finding out that the unstable husband might actually have legitimate grievances against the precious Harper. So let me get this straight, I said, watching the businessman finally hang up his phone and storm out of the coffee shop like he was personally offended by the existence of other people. Harper steals my watch, lies about it for a year, gets caught, and somehow I'm the bad guy. And instead of anyone asking what actually happened, they're all just accepting that I'm some kind of abusive lunatic who terrorizes innocent women over minor misunderstandings. That's pretty much it. Elise sounded as disgusted as I felt. I'm really sorry. I thought you should know what you're up against. What I was up against. Like this was a war instead of a family trying to deal with the inconvenient truth that one of their own was a thief. But maybe that's exactly what it was. A war between people who wanted to maintain comfortable lies and someone who was tired of pretending those lies were acceptable. Thanks for calling, Elise. I mean it. At least now I know where I stand. For what it's worth, I believe you. And I'm going to start asking some questions about my grandmother's ring. After I hung up, I sat in that Starbucks for another hour, watching people come and go with their normal problems and their functional families. Everyone around me was living in a world where theft was still theft, and calling out bad behavior wasn't considered a mental health crisis. I was starting to realize that I wanted to live in that world too. Going back to the apartment felt like returning to a crime scene where I was both the victim and the detective. Clara had texted me the night before saying she'd be at her mom's place, giving me space to think, which was suburban wife code for plotting my next emotional ambush with the family council. Perfect. That gave me a window to collect my stuff without having to endure another performance of Why Can't You Just Apologize to Harper? The musical. The place looked exactly the same. Our stupid couple's throw pillows still perfectly arranged on the couch. Clara's collection of decorative candles that she never lit still cluttering every surface. The wedding photos on the mantel still smiling their fake smiles like nothing had changed. But walking through those rooms felt like touring a museum exhibit called The Life You Used to Think You Had. I started in the bedroom, figuring I'd grab clothes and toiletries and maybe some books to keep me sane while I figured out what the hell came next. But as I was packing, this nagging feeling started gnawing at me. Like when you walk into a room and know something's different, but can't quite put your finger on what. It wasn't until I opened my jewelry box that it hit me. The cufflinks my brother had given me for my wedding were gone. I stared at the empty velvet slot where they should have been, my brain doing that thing where it tries to rationalize obvious evidence because accepting reality is too goddamn painful. Maybe I'd moved them. Maybe Clara had borrowed them for something. Maybe I was finally losing my mind like Harper's propaganda campaign suggested. But deep down I knew. Just like I'd known about the watch, somewhere in my subconscious I'd been tracking these little disappearances and filing them away under things that make you paranoid if you think about them too hard. I started going through the rest of my stuff with the methodical intensity of a crime scene investigator. The pocket knife my grandfather had carried in World War II, the one with his initials carved into the handle, was missing from my dresser drawer. The vintage camera lens I'd saved up for months to buy, the one Clara had rolled her eyes at because we already have a perfectly good camera on our phones, was gone from the office closet. Each missing item felt like a punch to the gut, but also like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. How many times had I looked for something and just assumed I'd misplaced it? How many times had Clara helped me search for things that were probably already in Harper's possession? I went to the safe we kept in the bedroom closet, a little fireproof box where we stored important documents and a few valuable items. The family photos were still there, along with our passports and insurance paperwork. But the space where I'd kept my grandfather's Purple Heart medal was empty. The coin collection my dad had started with me when I was 8 was gone. Even the expensive pin set I'd gotten as a graduation gift had vanished. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and started making a list. Not because I was planning to call the cops. Not yet, anyway. But because I needed to document this before I started second-guessing myself again. Before Clara came home with some perfectly reasonable explanation for why half my inherited valuables had mysteriously disappeared. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was diabolical in its simplicity. Harper wasn't just grabbing random stuff. She was targeting things with sentimental value, things that couldn't easily be replaced, things that would hurt them most to lose. The watch had been the crown jewel, but apparently it was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. I walked through the apartment room by room, opening every drawer, checking every hiding spot, looking for things I hadn't even realized were missing. In the kitchen, the vintage bottle opener my uncle had brought back from Ireland was gone. In the living room, the decorative compass my college roommate had given me had vanished from the bookshelf. But here's the really twisted part. Clara's stuff was all there. Every piece of jewelry, every family heirloom, every sentimental knick-knack her relatives had given her over the years. Harper apparently had enough sense not to steal from her own sister, or maybe Clara was just better at keeping track of her belongings. Either way, it was pretty convenient that the family kleptomaniac had only developed sticky fingers for my stuff. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone with its growing list of missing items, and tried to do the math. When had these things disappeared? How long had this been going on? The watch had been missing for a year, but some of this other stuff? I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen my grandfather's Purple Heart. Had it been there when we moved into this apartment 2 years ago? Had Harper been helping herself to my belongings since day one? The worst part wasn't even the theft itself, it was the gaslighting. Every time I'd mentioned something going missing, Clara had been right there with reasonable explanations. Maybe you left it at your mom's house. Are you sure you didn't pack it in storage? You know how absent-minded you can be. She'd helped me search for things that were probably sitting in Harper's apartment, all while making me feel like an idiot for losing track of my own possessions. I pulled out my laptop and started going through our shared photo albums, looking for evidence. There had to be pictures of these things, proof that they'd existed, proof that I wasn't just manufacturing a conspiracy theory out of thin air. And sure enough, there they were, photos from our housewarming party showing the compass on the bookshelf, pictures from last Christmas with me wearing the cufflinks, a selfie Clara had taken where my grandfather's medal was clearly visible on the dresser behind us. But as I scrolled through more recent photos, I could track the timeline of their disappearance. The compass had been gone since at least last summer. The cufflinks had vanished sometime around Harper's birthday party in September, the party we'd hosted at our apartment, where Harper had spent the night because she'd been too tired to drive home. The Purple Heart had disappeared after Thanksgiving. When Harper had come over to help, Clara planned their mother's surprise Christmas party. Every major family gathering, every time Harper had been in our apartment, something had gone missing. And Clara had either been oblivious to it or she'd known, just like she'd eventually known about the watch. I walked back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, looking around at what was supposed to be our sanctuary. The room where we'd planned our future, where we'd talked about kids and dream vacations and growing old together. Now it felt like a crime scene, contaminated by lies and theft and betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "How's the packing going? I hope you're finding everything you need." Finding everything I need. That was almost funny, in a twisted way. I was finding everything except the stuff that actually mattered to me, the irreplaceable things that had connected me to my family, my history, my identity. Those were long gone, probably displayed in Harper's apartment like trophies from successful hunting expeditions. I typed back, "Just great. By any chance, do you know where my grandfather's Purple Heart is?" Having trouble locating it. The three dots appeared and disappeared several times, like she was typing and deleting responses. Finally, "I'm sure it's there somewhere. Maybe check the office closet." I'd already checked the office closet. I checked everywhere. But Clara was still playing this game, where we pretended I was just bad at finding things, where we maintained the fiction that my belongings were disappearing due to my own carelessness rather than her sister's criminal hobby. I turned off my phone and finished packing in silence. When I was done, I did one more walkthrough, taking pictures of all the empty spaces where my things used to be. Evidence for a case I wasn't sure I was ready to make yet, but evidence nonetheless. Because one way or another, this shit was going to stop. You know that moment in detective movies where the hero finds the smoking gun hidden in some obvious place the bad guys never thought anyone would look? Well, turns out real life isn't that dramatic. My smoking gun was sitting right there in Clara's Google Photos account, shared with me for 5 years of marital bliss, just waiting for someone to actually pay attention to what was in the damn folders. I was sitting in a 24-hour diner at 2 a.m., mainlining coffee and trying to make sense of what I discovered in the apartment, when I decided to go full digital detective. If Harper had been systematically stealing my stuff for years, there had to be evidence somewhere. People like her don't just commit crimes, they document them, because deep down they're proud of what they're getting away with. I opened up our shared photo library on my laptop, the one Clara and I had been using to store memories of our perfect little life together. At first, I was just looking for photos that might show when my stuff had gone missing, innocent screenshots from my growing evidence file. But as I scrolled through the albums, I noticed folders I'd never paid attention to before. Most of them were the usual suspects. Vacation 2023, Clara's birthday, random cute stuff. But there was one folder buried in the family section that made my blood run cold. Harper's Finds. Harper's Finds. Not Harper's Gifts or Harper's Collection. Finds. Like she was a fucking treasure hunter discovering lost artifacts instead of a thief stealing from her brother-in-law. I clicked on the folder, and my laptop screen filled with dozens of photos that made my stomach drop into my shoes. There was my grandfather's Purple Heart, laid out on what looked like Harper's coffee table with a caption that read, "So cool. Family history is the best." There were my wedding cufflinks, photographed against some fancy fabric with the text, "Perfect for date night." But it got worse. So much worse. There was my vintage camera lens, displayed next to Harper's regular camera with the caption, "Now I can take professional quality photos." #upgrade time. The antique compass was sitting on her bookshelf between some romance novels, captioned, "New decoration for the apartment." Love how old-timey this looks. My grandfather's pocket knife was photographed next to some camping gear with borrowed this for the hiking trip. So much cooler than modern knives. Borrowed. Borrowed for a hiking trip that had happened 8 months ago. Borrowed with no intention of returning it, apparently, since it was still sitting in Harper's apartment like it fucking belonged there. Each photo was like a punch to the gut, but I kept scrolling because I needed to see how deep this rabbit hole went. And that's when I found the photo that made me want to put my laptop through the diner window. It was my father's watch, sitting on Harper's nightstand with the caption, "Borrowed this beauty for Jennifer's wedding. Don't tell her husband, LOL. Don't tell her husband. LOL. My most precious possession, the only thing I had left of my father, was a fucking joke to her. Something she'd stolen and then laughed about with my own wife. Because that's what the LOL meant, right? That Clara had seen this photo, had known Harper had my watch, and they both thought it was hilarious that I was in the dark about it. I scrolled down to the comments section under the photo, and there it was in black and white. Clara had liked the photo. My loving wife had actually hit the little heart button on a picture of my stolen watch, complete with Harper's sarcastic caption about not telling me. But wait, it gets even better. There was a comment from Clara. "Looks great on you. He probably won't even notice it's gone," face with tears of joy. He probably won't even notice it's gone. With a fucking laughing emoji. I sat there in that shitty diner booth, staring at my laptop screen, trying to process the fact that my wife had not only known about the theft, but had actively participated in mocking me for it. They'd been laughing at me for a year, sharing inside jokes about how clueless I was, treating my grief over losing my father's watch like it was entertainment. I kept scrolling through the comments, and it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. There were likes from other family members. Sylvia had hearted the photo. A couple of cousins had left laughing emojis. Even Clara's aunt had commented, "So pretty." Harper has such good taste in accessories. Good taste in accessories. My stolen inheritance was Harper's good taste in accessories. I screenshotted everything. Every photo, every caption, every comment, every like. My hands were shaking as I saved file after file to a new folder I labeled Evidence. Because that's what this was now. Evidence of a criminal conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for years. But the photos told an even darker story than I'd initially realized. The timestamps showed that this had been going on since practically the beginning of my marriage. The oldest photo in the folder was from 3 years ago, my college class ring, which I'd assumed I'd lost during our move. Harper had posted a picture of herself wearing it with the caption, "Found this in the couch cushions. Finders keepers. Finders keepers." She'd taken my class ring and then posted about it like it was some kind of game. And based on the comments, everyone thought it was hilarious. I went back through the folder chronologically, tracking the evolution of Harper's criminal hobby. At first, she'd been almost subtle about it, posting photos without explicitly saying where she'd gotten the items. But as time went on and nobody called her out, she'd gotten bolder. The captions became more obvious, the jokes more blatant, the theft more brazen. By the time she'd stolen my watch, she wasn't even pretending anymore. She was openly mocking me in photo captions, and my own wife was cheering her on. It was like they'd all been playing this elaborate prank where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I kept taking screenshots, building a digital paper trail that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. Because this wasn't just theft anymore. This was documented evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior, complete with timestamps, locations, and commentary from co-conspirators. The more I scrolled, the angrier I got. These people had been treating my belongings like a fucking lending library for years, passing around my most precious possessions like party favors. And they documented every bit of it, probably because they never thought I'd be smart enough or suspicious enough to actually look. But here's the thing that really got under my skin. The photos showed that this wasn't just about taking things. Harper was actively using my stolen property to enhance her own life, to impress her friends, to play dress-up with accessories that weren't hers. My grandfather's purple heart wasn't sitting in a drawer somewhere. It was displayed in her living room like a conversation piece. My father's watch wasn't hidden away in guilt. It was being worn to social events where Harper could show off her vintage find. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was stealing my family history, my connections to the people I'd lost, and then parading them around like they were fucking fashion statements. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the diner booth, looking around at the other late-night customers nursing their coffee and trying to solve their own problems. A trucker reading a paperback novel. A nurse coming off a late shift, staring at her phone with exhausted eyes. Normal people dealing with normal problems in normal ways. None of them were sitting in a diner at 2 a.m. discovering that their wife's family had been running a theft ring for years and documenting it on social media like it was a fucking hobby. I reopened the laptop and started copying everything to cloud storage, multiple backup drives, anywhere I could think of. Because Harper and Clara had made one crucial mistake in their little criminal enterprise. They'd created a digital paper trail that was about to become their worst nightmare. They thought I'd never find this folder. They thought I'd never put the pieces together. They thought I'd just keep playing the role of the clueless husband who loses track of his own belongings. But they'd underestimated exactly how thorough someone can be when they finally stop making excuses for the people who've been screwing them over. Going completely off the grid felt like the first smart decision I'd made in years. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and logged out of every shared platform that connected me to Clara's dysfunctional family circus. If they wanted to spin their little narrative about my alleged mental breakdown, they could do it without me being there to watch the show. My buddy Marcus had this guest room in his house that he'd been trying to rent out for months, and when I called him at 3 a.m. from that diner, he didn't ask questions, just told me to come over and bring whatever I needed to stay comfortable. Marcus was one of those rare friends who understood that sometimes life explodes in your face, and you need a safe place to rebuild from the wreckage. "Dude, you look like hell," he said when I showed up at his door with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag full of evidence. "What happened? Did Clara finally lose her mind? If only it were that simple. Her sister's been stealing from me for years, and Clara's been covering for her. I just found out the whole family thinks I'm some kind of unstable nutcase because I had the audacity to call theft what it is." Marcus made coffee while I gave him the condensed version of my holiday from hell, and to his credit, he didn't once suggest that maybe I was overreacting or that family dysfunction was just something you had to tolerate. He listened, nodded in all the right places, and when I was done, he said exactly what I needed to hear. "Holy shit, man. Those people are criminals. What are you going to do about it?" What was I going to do about it? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? For 5 years, I'd been playing by their rules, accepting their version of reality, letting them convince me that their behavior was normal and my reactions were the problem. But now that I could see the whole picture, now that I had evidence of their systematic theft and cover-up, I had options that didn't involve just taking it anymore. I set up shop in Marcus's guest room like I was planning a military campaign. Laptop on the desk, printer borrowed from his home office, a dozen folders organized by category and date. I had photos, timestamps, a detailed inventory of missing items, and a growing timeline that painted a picture of criminal activity that would make any prosecutor's mouth water. But I needed more than just evidence. I needed professional help. Someone who understood the legal system and could tell me exactly how much trouble Harper and Clara were actually in. So I started researching lawyers, specifically ones who specialized in theft, property crimes, and digital evidence. That's how I found Jordan Chun, a lawyer who advertised expertise in complex family property disputes and digital theft cases. Her online reviews were full of clients praising her for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch, for going after people who thought they were untouchable because of family connections or social status. She sounded perfect for dealing with Harper's particular brand of entitled criminality. I called her office on a Tuesday morning, expecting to get shuffled to a receptionist and told to wait weeks for a consultation. Instead, Jordan answered her own phone and listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that told me she'd dealt with cases like this before. "So let me get this straight," she said after I'd finished explaining the situation. "Your sister-in-law has been systematically stealing your belongings for years, documenting the theft on social media, and when you finally called her out, your wife's family launched a smear campaign to make you look unstable. That's the basic outline, yeah? And I've got screenshots of everything, the photos, the comments, the whole digital paper trail they created without realizing it." Jordan was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing in the background. "Can you be in my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? And bring everything you've got, photos, inventories, timeline, the works. This sounds like it could be a very interesting case." Interesting. I liked the way she said that, like Harper's crimes weren't just petty family drama, but actual legal problems that could have real consequences. The next day, I walked into Jordan's office with a briefcase full of evidence that would have made the FBI proud. She was exactly what I'd hoped for, sharp, no nonsense, and clearly pissed off on my behalf as I walked her through the scope of Harper's theft ring. "This is impressive documentation," she said, flipping through my organized folders. "Most people in your situation would have maybe a few photos and a vague timeline. You've built a case that would hold up in criminal court. So what are my options?" Jordan leaned back in her chair and gave me the kind of smile that probably made opposing lawyers break out in cold sweats. "Oh, we have lots of options. We can file criminal charges for theft. We can pursue civil recovery for the stolen property. We can go after anyone who aided and abetted the crimes. And if your wife has been using shared credit cards or accounts to facilitate any of this, we can explore fraud charges too." Fraud charges. I hadn't even thought about that angle, but it made sense. If Clara had been helping Harper or covering expenses related to the theft, she could be looking at serious legal trouble. What about the social media evidence? The photos and comments? "That's the beautiful part," Jordan said, pulling up the screenshots on her laptop. "They documented everything themselves. We don't have to prove intent or establish a pattern. They literally created a public record of their criminal activity. This Harper woman posted photos of stolen property with captions admitting to theft, and your wife commented approvingly. It's like they were trying to build a case against themselves." Over the next week, Jordan and I worked together to build what she called the most thoroughly documented theft case she'd seen in years. We organized everything chronologically, cross-referenced the social media posts with my inventory of missing items, and built a timeline that showed clear escalation in Harper's criminal behavior. But the more we dug, the more we found. Jordan suggested I check credit card statements and bank records for any unusual charges that might be connected to Harper's activities. And sure enough, there they were. Charges to jewelry stores on days when Harper had been wearing my stolen accessories, restaurant bills from nights when she'd been out showing off my watch, even a charge to a photographer who'd apparently taken professional photos of Harper wearing some of my missing items. Clara had paid for it all. My own wife had been financially supporting Harper's theft hobby, using our shared accounts to fund the accessories and occasions where my stolen property was being displayed. "Your wife is looking at potential fraud charges," Jordan explained as we went through the financial records. "If she was knowingly using shared marital assets to facilitate theft from you, that opens up a whole new category of legal problems for her." By the end of the week, we had enough evidence to file both criminal and civil cases that would probably end with Harper in jail and Clara facing serious financial consequences. But Jordan suggested we start with something more targeted, something that would let Harper and her family know exactly how much trouble they were in without giving them time to destroy evidence or coordinate their stories. "We filed a criminal complaint first," she said, "then hit them with civil suits while they're still reeling from the police investigation. By the time they realize how serious this is, we'll already have them on record with their initial lies and denials." I sat in Jordan's office that Friday afternoon, looking at the stack of legal documents we'd prepared, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: control. For the first time since Christmas morning, I wasn't reacting to their bullshit. I was dictating the terms of engagement. Harper thought she was untouchable because she was family. Clara thought she could gaslight me into accepting their version of reality. Sylvia thought she could dismiss my concerns as drama and make me the problem. They were all about to learn that stealing from someone and then mocking them for it has consequences that go way beyond family dysfunction. The paperwork was filed that afternoon, and Jordan assured me that Harper would be getting a very unpleasant surprise from law enforcement within the next few days. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized that her victim had decided to stop being a victim. There's something beautifully poetic about watching a thief get caught with their hands in the cookie jar, especially when they're wearing your stolen property while doing it. I got to experience that particular flavor of justice on a Tuesday morning when Officer Martinez, no relation to my lawyer, just one of those cosmic coincidences that make life interesting, accompanied me back to my apartment for what the police report called recovery of stolen property. Clara had been texting me for weeks, alternating between guilt trips, "Harper is devastated, she's barely eating," and threats, "If you don't stop this nonsense, I'm filing for divorce." What she hadn't been doing was warning her kleptomaniac sister that her little shopping spree was about to become a police matter. Apparently, even after everything that had happened, Clara still thought she could manage this situation with the power of positive thinking and aggressive denial. She was about to learn otherwise. I used my key to let us into the apartment, and the first thing I heard was Harper's voice coming from the living room. "Clara, is that you? I thought you were getting groceries." She sounded relaxed, comfortable, like she was right at home in my space. Which, given how much of my stuff she'd stolen over the years, I guess she kind of was. "Police, ma'am," Officer Martinez called out, and I swear to God the silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next building. "We're here to execute a search warrant for stolen property." Harper appeared in the doorway wearing my leather jacket, the one I'd gotten for my 30th birthday, the one I'd been looking for since last summer. She'd paired it with jeans and boots, looking like she was about to head out for a casual day of being a functioning member of society instead of a career criminal who'd been caught red-handed. The look on her face when she saw me standing behind the officer was absolutely priceless. Pure shock mixed with panic, like a deer caught in headlights if deer were capable of larceny and emotional manipulation. For a moment, she just stood there, processing the fact that her favorite victim had finally grown a spine. What's going on?" she stammered, unconsciously pulling my jacket tighter around herself like it could somehow provide protection from the consequences of her actions. Officer Martinez consulted his paperwork with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this dance 100 times before. "We have a warrant to search these premises for items reported stolen from the complainant. You're going to need to step aside while we conduct our search." "Stolen? I didn't steal anything. This is just a misunderstanding." Harper's voice was climbing toward hysteria, which was honestly music to my ears after months of her treating theft like a fucking hobby. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Ma'am, you're currently wearing my leather jacket. The one I reported missing 6 months ago. The one you're literally wearing right now while claiming you haven't stolen anything." Harper looked down at the jacket like she'd forgotten she was wearing it, then back at me with this expression of wounded innocence that would have been Oscar-worthy if it wasn't completely fucking ridiculous. "I borrowed this. Clara said I could borrow it." "When did Clara give you permission to borrow my jacket, Harper?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and reasonable for the recording. "Because she's not here, and this is my apartment, and that's my property you're wearing." The beautiful thing about catching someone in the act is watching them realize that all their carefully constructed lies are crumbling in real time. Harper's face went through about 6 different emotions before settling on desperate anger. "This is harassment. You can't just bring police into my family's home because you're having some kind of breakdown." "Actually, ma'am, this is his home," Officer Martinez said dryly. "And we can absolutely bring police here when someone reports stolen property. Now, are you going to remove that jacket voluntarily, or do we need to make this more official?" Harper stripped off my jacket like it was on fire, revealing that she was also wearing one of my vintage band t-shirts underneath. The hits just kept coming. Officer Martinez added both items to his evidence list while Harper stood there in her bra, shivering and trying to figure out how her perfect crime had turned into a public humiliation. But the real treasure hunt was just getting started. We moved through the apartment systematically, with me identifying my stolen property and Officer Martinez documenting everything. It was like a twisted scavenger hunt where every discovery made Harper look more and more like the career criminal she actually was. In the bedroom closet, we found my grandfather's Purple Heart displayed on Harper's dresser like a fucking trophy. In her jewelry box, my wedding cufflinks were sitting next to her own earrings like they belonged there. The vintage camera lens was in her camera bag, ready for her next Instagram photo shoot featuring stolen goods. With each discovery, Harper's story changed. First, Clara had given her permission to borrow everything. Then, I had told her she could take whatever she wanted. Then, she'd found everything in the trash and rescued it. Then, she'd bought similar items, and we were confusing her stuff with mine. Then, she started crying and claiming she was being persecuted for being a woman. Officer Martinez had clearly dealt with people like Harper before. He just kept writing, documenting every item, every serial number, every piece of evidence that would turn her little hobby into a felony conviction. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," he said at one point when Harper's explanations became particularly creative. "You might want to exercise that right." But Harper couldn't shut up. She kept digging herself deeper, insisting that this was all a misunderstanding, that family members borrow things from each other all the time, that I was being vindictive because I couldn't handle her success. Success. She called stealing my inheritance her success. The moment that really broke her was when we found my father's watch in her purse. She'd been carrying it around like a regular accessory, my most precious possession reduced to just another piece of jewelry in her collection. When Officer Martinez pulled it out and read the inscription on the back, "To my son, with love, Dad," Harper's face went white. That's not what it looks like," she whispered, but we all knew it was exactly what it looked like. "It looks like you're carrying around someone else's sentimental property," Officer Martinez said, bagging the watch as evidence. "Property that was reported stolen and that you claim you never took." By the time we finished cataloging everything, we had enough evidence to stock a small museum of Harper's criminal enterprise. 14 separate items, ranging from jewelry to electronics to family heirlooms, all of which Harper had various creative explanations for possessing. The paperwork alone was going to take hours. But here's where it gets really beautiful. While Officer Martinez was processing Harper for receiving stolen goods, my phone started buzzing with notifications. News travels fast in suburban families, and apparently someone had seen the police cars outside the apartment and started asking questions. Within 2 hours, my Facebook post was live. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just a simple statement of facts with attached photos of the evidence recovery. After months of investigation, police recovered stolen property from my sister-in-law's possession today. Items included family heirlooms, wedding gifts, and inherited jewelry taken from our home over the past 3 years. Thank you to everyone who supported me during this difficult time. The photos spoke for themselves. Officer Martinez holding my grandfather's Purple Heart, Harper's mugshot from the police station, screenshots of the Harper's Finds folder with her mocking captions. No editorializing needed, just the truth, documented and verified by law enforcement. Within hours, the comments section became a battlefield. Family members who'd believed Harper's lies were suddenly confronted with photographic evidence that their golden girl was actually a career thief. Cousins started posting about their own missing items. Aunts began sharing stories about jewelry that had disappeared after Harper visited. Elisa's comment was my personal favorite. "Well, this explains where my grandmother's engagement ring went. Harper borrowed it for a date 8 months ago and claimed she'd lost it. Turns out she just forgot to mention she'd added it to her permanent collection." The dominoes were falling exactly like I'd hoped they would. Harper's reputation was imploding in real time as people realized they'd been defending a thief who'd been systematically robbing her own family for years. The narrative was flipping from poor Harper being persecuted by her unstable brother-in-law to holy shit, Harper's been stealing from everyone and we all just enabled it. But the best part? Clara's radio silence. While her family members were posting shocked comments and sharing their own stories of Harper's theft, my loving wife was nowhere to be found online. No defense of her sister, no attack on me, no attempt to spin the story. Just silence. Because what the fuck was she going to say? That police evidence was fake? That her sister hadn't really been caught red-handed wearing my stolen property? By evening, Harper was out on bail and hiding at her mother's house, probably trying to figure out how to explain away photographic evidence of her crimes. Sylvia was apparently too distraught to comment, which was suburban speak for "my daughter is a felon and I don't know how to spin this." And Clara? Clara finally called me around midnight, her voice small and defeated. "Can we talk?" she asked. I think we need to talk." 24 hours earlier, she'd been demanding I apologize to her thief of a sister. Now she wanted to talk, probably because she'd finally realized that being married to someone who calls out crimes isn't the same as being married to someone who commits them. "Sure," I said, leaning back in Marcus's guest room chair and looking at my father's watch, finally back where it belonged. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about a lot of things." The war was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was winning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, my actual apartment, not some hotel room or friend's guest bedroom, watching the morning light hit my father's watch on the nightstand. It's a quiet Tuesday in a city 2 hours away from the Reynolds family circus, and for the first time in years, I can honestly say I sleep like a baby. The apartment isn't much to look at from the outside. One of those converted warehouse buildings where the rent is reasonable because the neighborhood hasn't been fully gentrified yet. But inside, it's mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every coffee mug in the cabinet belongs to me and only me. Nobody's going to borrow anything and forget to return it. Nobody's going to gaslight me about my own belongings disappearing. Nobody's going to mock me for caring about things that matter. The watch sits there ticking away like it's been waiting patiently for things to get back to normal. I don't wear it often anymore, not because I don't love it, but because it carries too much weight now. It's not just my connection to my father anymore. It's proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that I was right to trust my instincts, proof that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you should trust the least. The legal stuff wrapped up about a month ago. Harper pleaded guilty to theft charges and got sentenced to community service and restitution, which sounds light until you realize she also had to pay my legal fees and damages. Turns out stealing from family members doesn't get you much sympathy from judges, especially when you document your crimes on social media like some kind of criminal influencer. Clara and I are divorced now, obviously. The papers came through last week, and honestly, signing them felt more like relief than grief. We tried the counseling thing for about 5 minutes, but it's hard to rebuild trust with someone who spent years lying to your face about theft. The counselor kept talking about rebuilding communication. But how do you communicate with someone who thinks covering up crimes is just keeping the peace? The funniest part is how the family narrative shifted once the dust settled. Suddenly, everyone remembered being suspicious of Harper's behavior. Suddenly, everyone had noticed things going missing but didn't want to cause drama. Suddenly, I went from being the unstable troublemaker to being the victim everyone was secretly rooting for. Elise calls me sometimes to update me on the family gossip. Apparently, Harper's moved back in with Sylvia and is working at some retail job where they probably keep a close eye on the inventory. She's in therapy now, which is great, but somehow I doubt they're going to therapy their way out of being the kind of person who steals family heirlooms and then laughs about it online. Sylvia is still playing the victim, telling anyone who'll listen that I destroyed the family by overreacting to Harper's mistakes. Because apparently, systematic theft over multiple years counts as mistakes when it's your precious daughter doing the stealing. Some people never learn. But here's the thing that really gets me. I'm happier now than I've been in years. I wake up in the morning without that low-level anxiety that used to follow me around like a personal storm cloud. I don't second-guess myself about missing items or wonder if I'm losing my mind. I don't have to pretend that dysfunction is just quirky family dynamics. I've got new friends now. People I met through work, neighbors, even some folks from Marcus's social circle who treat me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed. It's amazing how much easier relationships are when the other person isn't actively stealing from you or covering for someone who is. The watch on my nightstand isn't just a reminder of my father anymore. It's a reminder that truth has a way of coming out, that standing up for yourself is worth the temporary chaos, that some bridges are meant to be burned. My dad always told me that a man's character is measured by how he handles adversity, and I think he'd be proud of how I handled this particular shitstorm. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what would have happened if I'd just let it slide, if I'd accepted Harper's non-apology and moved on like Clara wanted me to. But then I look at that watch and remember the year I spent grieving for it while Harper wore it to parties and posted photos with captions about how great it looked on her. Some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone tells you to let it go. Some battles are worth winning, even when victory costs you relationships you thought you valued. Some truths are worth telling, even when nobody wants to hear them. I keep the watch close not because I'm living in the past, but because it reminds me that I finally learned to fight for my future. They thought I'd stay quiet, thought I'd keep playing the role of the family doormat who absorbs abuse and calls it love. Instead, I set fire to their lies and walked away from the ashes. And you know what? The view from here is pretty fucking good.